My Lords, as with my colleagues on these benches, I'm a strong supporter of devolution. I was therefore sadly disappointed to see in this bill the number of places where power is still to be with Whitehall and not with local government, where opportunities for genuine devolution are missed, and where it risks adding to rather than reducing the legal complexity faced by local government. Let me briefly give examples of each, and in doing so I hope my Lord suggest some areas where amendments may in due course help improve this bill. I start with the most fundamental of provisions, the rights of people to elect those who govern themselves. We all recognise that in some exceptional circumstances it can be necessary to delay democracy. I doubt few, if any, in this House would think, for example, it was a mistake to delay the general election during the Second World War. But, my Lord, such delays should be the rare exceptions, moments of major crisis where safety is at risk. Yet the bill as it stands would continue the power of a central government, including any future government of who knows what level of commitment to democracy, to cancel elections that have been previously scheduled simply by order of the Minister. My Lords, that is far too low a bar. The postponing of democracy should require the full permission of Parliament through primary legislation. So I hope the noble lady, the Minister, will say more in due course about why the government views local democracy as not being worthy of the protection that would come from requiring primary legislation to interfere with it. Turning to examples of where powers could and should be devolved, but are being kept within Whitehall's grip, let me give two. Here in this House, we let members participate remotely. It's a carefully limited right, but it's one that's used and that works, whether or not we happen to agree with those remotely contributed views. Personally, I would make the rules more permissive, but even as they stand, the rules are more permissive than what Parliament allows local councils in England to do. If we think it's okay for us to decide these matters for ourselves, even though there isn't the safeguard of elections for people to kick us out if we get it wrong, why should we withhold that right from democratic councils? Indeed, we've seen remote participation used successfully in local government around the UK, both during COVID and since then, outside of England. And, to give credit where it's due, earlier this year the government made positive noises about introducing new rights for remote participation in English local government, with the proviso of needing to find parliamentary time in due course. Well, my Lords, here we are in Parliament. We have local government legislation in front of us and a good chunk of time allocated. So I hope the noble Baroness, the Minister, can tell us more about why this opportunity to get on an act and get this sorted is not being taken. To turn to another example of how the bill still holds so much power tightly at the centre, let me pick the example of cattle grids. For those of us who are collectors of examples of unusual centralisation, the grip of Whitehall over permission to install a new cattle grid is in its own way a famous example. So my hopes rose when I saw cattle grids mentioned in the White Paper. But looking through the bill, the decentralisation of those powers does not seem to have made it into the bill. Indeed, the whole bundle of decentralisation mentioned alongside cattle grids in the White Paper seems to have been watered down significantly. I hope this is not due to any change of mind by the government. I hope it's not due to a sudden fear that if the controlling, centralised hand of the Secretary of State is relaxed, we'll have a sudden outbreak of mad cattle grid disease sweeping the country. So I look forward to hearing more from the Minister in due course as to what's happened to those final two sentences in the local government taking back control section of the White Paper. But turning to the third area I mentioned, the risks of adding to, rather than reducing, the legal burden on local government and the complexity in this bill, as also touched on earlier by the noble Lord Lansley. My point here is simply so much of the legislation which Parliament passes ends up never being commenced. We do all the work to legislate, but the law then sits there with different pieces buried in different places within it, never getting commenced. Now, I appreciate, for understandable, practical reasons, the commencement provisions in this bill are not simple, stretching over 3 full pages. But the way the commencement of different parts is left open, particularly in clause 92, paragraph 7, runs the risk of repeating so many previous pieces of local government legislation that it never does all get commenced. So I hope too that the noble lady, the Minister, will share where the government's thinking is on having a clear cut-off date, so that if parts of this legislation are not otherwise commenced sooner, there is a backstop that catches the remaining items and ensures that this bill doesn't become just another addition to that huge sludge of bits and pieces of previous local government legislation that get passed but they're never enacted, hanging around in limbo. To conclude then, I hope that as this bill progresses, we will see from the government more willingness to enact genuine devolution, and in particular look forward to hearing from the Minister the government's thinking on the right threshold for cancelling elections, why elected councillors should not have the same rights that we hold for ourselves for allowing remote participation in their proceedings, whether the government is still committed to devolving power over cattle grids, and what the government will do to ensure that whatever Parliament passes, it really does at some point come into force. If we can get those issues right, the bill will be very much the better for it.
Yeah.